He needs to do something. Welcome back to Show and Teller. I'm so happy that we get to be here again this wonderful Friday morning. And actually today happens to be October 31st, Halloween, Erev Shabbat. And some might say, Rabbi, you've never used the prop of a hat while you've been on your show. So I have to be very transparent and very honest, because this is what we're all about, is that I actually got into the car this morning, drove down the 10 freeway, showed up to our Show and Teller headquarters, and as I was outside, I started feeling like a little bit of like, oh man, that's interesting. I feel the wind on my head, which I normally don't feel the wind on my head. And our guest today, who's a little bit taller than me, happened to say, Rabbi, you're not wearing a yarmulke. And I said, wow, that's a first. And I said, hold on one second, let me run to my car, because all rabbis, you would assume, would have a yarmulke in their car. And I don't have a yarmulke in my car, and being that I'm in the fashion district in downtown LA, you would think that there would be some hat on the corner, but that also didn't happen. So luckily, our producer, Ken, who is wearing a nice Halloween hat, I said, Ken, I don't think I can do this episode without a yarmulke, so can I please use your Halloween hat? And he's like, Rabbi, I don't know if it matches with what you're going with. I said, it's all part of the story. How to overcome adversity, how to make the most out of every situation that you're in. And it actually works out well with our guests that we have today. So that's a good transition into our guest today, because I'd like to introduce to you Elan Javanfard, psychotherapist. And this is exactly what he would probably tell the clientele that he works with, is that, you know what, life sometimes brings you lemons, and you have to make lemonade out of every situation that you're dealing with. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Elan Javanfard, psychotherapist extraordinaire, and we will get into his background, into his story, and we will learn more about him. So thank you, Elan, for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for bringing me here, and thank you for what you do with the show as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So Elan, I part of this is that I try to bring in interesting people, and he's saying I'm interesting. You're very interesting to me, because I do think that the world that we live in today, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of people trying to go for the glory, go for the gusto, and people are probably not always real with themselves. People are not always real with their direction and the struggles that they might have, or being self-aware enough and dealing with trauma and dealing with purpose. And I just thought that we haven't really had a guest like you, the opportunity to have a guest like you. So I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to hear exactly what it is that you do, and the type of clientele that you deal with, and certain struggles that you might see that our world is going through, and maybe what are some modalities and passions that you have that you bring your work into your life, all the above. So I think that would be the goalpost and how we're going to go. But first things first, I want to hear about you. Elan, where are you from?
Wow, it's a lot to get to. So amazing. I am from here. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, not far from where I currently live. Went to middle school in Los Angeles, Jewish school, went to high school here in Los Angeles, then went to Israel, moved to Israel, and lived there for almost 3 years, where I was doing yeshiva and simultaneously doing my undergrad degree. So I was studying during the day in yeshiva and taking some online classes and in-person classes in Israel for university, and coming back in the summers to finish my undergrad. Interestingly enough, at the time when I was living there in Israel, I was on the fence as to would I stay and go down the rabbinic track, or would I go into grad school? And had I not got into grad school, I may have defaulted back and remained there on that track.
But as a sign of respect, we say like Rabbi Javanfard because it's a sign of. I mean,
you can call me whatever you want to call me. I've been called worse. No, I'm kidding. It was a path that I thought I'd find myself on. I didn't assume I would be going to grad school for mental health. My passion was more in line with the side of medicine and possibly considering going into the medical field. And as I learned more and more about the medical field, I realized I actually was more interested in the human mind and the emotional experience of people rather than the medical side of things.
Did you personally have any experiences growing up or certain family or friends that suggested maybe go this route, or was there maybe a personal story that said, you know what, I'm good at this and this would be something that would fall in line with who I am as a person?
A few things that come to mind, and I think they over time we realized that they strung into the experience they were. But I oftentimes found myself being in my family and in my friend group the person who people would rely on and come to and want to talk things through. It was very high school, middle school experience of people being like, can we have a DMC, a deep, meaningful conversation? We now call that therapy. But a lot of that would frequently happen, even with adults, like my parents or other people would want to talk something through or rationalize the objectives of doing something. So in many ways I had that experience of being parentified, and doing a lot of that. In 12th grade, I had an English teacher who gave me a copy of Viktor Frankl's book, A Man's Search for Meaning, which up until then I had not been familiar with. For those who aren't familiar with it, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist living in Germany, and he went through the Holocaust. He was a psychiatrist pre the war, and he went through the Holocaust, and he wrote a book on his experience in the Holocaust, and it's broken down into two parts. It's part one is his story of how he survived the Holocaust and that experience, and part two is his therapeutic belief of the world and the way he views mankind through the lens of his experience, which was seminal at the time to this idea that a person who has a meaning in their life can really overcome any kind of issue or how in their life. It's I took that book with me and I was very fascinated by it. I was very fascinated by the resiliency of a person, people who could live through and go through the Holocaust and that experience. A lot of that was predicated on not having any family or friends who were Holocaust survivors. We're coming from the Middle East and parents came from Iran. They had their own struggles. They escaped their own persecution, but they didn't really have a meaningful relationship with the Holocaust story, which is a very Jewish experience that many people have. So this was one of my first kind of inroads to that. And then when I was in yeshiva, my chavrusa, the person I was learning with on a day-to-day basis, he was an individual who himself had been through a lot of therapy, and he was actively in recovery. He was a little older than the other guys in the school, but he asked me if I can come with him to help support some recovery groups that he was helping out with. And I told him, I said, listen, I'm not in recovery myself.
Recovery means?
Meaning somebody who's had an addiction problem or a substance problem or some other issue that they're really working past. And he said, it'd still be valuable for you to come and you'd still be a good, person to be there for. And I started doing some volunteer work in that space and found it to be really fascinating. So I think those things in hand started to kind of gear me a little bit more towards the field of mental health overall. In our family, myself, I never had my own individual therapy growing up, but we had family members who had therapy. And I remember a lot of the stigma and shame. I remember being told, we don't talk about these things. We don't tell people that somebody's in therapy.
And would you say that's more of a cultural thing in your situation?
Interesting, because I thought at the time it was cultural only, that I thought it was okay, this is a Persian culture thing or maybe a Jewish thing, but we know that stigma around mental health is pervasive and it's prevalent in many, many spaces. There happens to be certain cultures that there is a lot more stigma. Anyone who comes from a Middle Eastern culture, anyone who comes from a culture that places a lot of emphasis on family or matchmaking and dating, which is very common in the Jewish community, those types of things are kept a little bit more private because of the fear of what it may mean for a person's prospects of dating or marriage or the future. So we had those experiences, and I remember being told, like, we don't talk about this, we don't tell people about it. And I feel like the first time I actually told somebody that, like, I had family or loved ones that went through therapy or had their struggles was in grad school. Where, like, in grad school, people were like, do you know anybody who suffers with X, Y, or Z type of mental health issues? And I raised my hand and realized that, like, almost everyone else in the room did too. So it was validating to, like, realize that it was more common than I had thought. And I understood why there was still a lot of stigma involved in it.
Do you think that society still has, as a whole, a stigma around mental health and therapy? Or are we crossing that threshold and saying, you know, it's not as taboo?
It's definitely not as taboo as it was, let's say, in the 80s and even in the late 90s. It started getting better over time. I think different communities have different levels of stigma that have shifted over time. So I would say that in the, like, non-Jewish spaces, the stigma around mental health has diminished exponentially in the last, like, 20, 30 years. In the Jewish community, from what I've noticed, that while it's gotten substantially better, the big shift point was COVID. For many people, during COVID, during the beginning of COVID, everyone had this collective experience of isolation, anxiety, fear. And, like,
The world's going to end.
Yeah, the really, really beginning phases where I remember, like,
There was no playbook on this.
right, yeah, no one knew what to do. Everyone was stuck at home. People were isolated at home. They were sad. They weren't able to rely on a lot of the coping skills they usually had, like going places, seeing their friends, seeing their family, seeing their loved
Stuck
ones.
with a spouse might.
Seriously. Like, a lot of that alcohol sales during COVID rose 346%. 346%, like, in that year. And I remember being in, like, work meetings at 2:00 in the afternoon and people were drinking wine, like, at work. Like that. So two things happened. One is we all collectively experienced a similar trauma. We want to call it that. We all collectively experienced some kind of similar shock in our life. So it lowered the threshold of fear of saying, like, I'm anxious, I'm scared, I'm depressed. So people became a little bit more comfortable having those discussions, and people started to shift into more comfortability with therapy. At the same time, when it came to more of the high risk spaces of therapy, so we're talking about, like, pervasive substance use, like real large trauma, suicide, that kind of stuff, the stigma still is persistent, and that stigma is persistent in the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community, overall. So, like, on one hand, commonplace therapy became less stigmatized, but therapy for more systemic or serious concerns may have been pushed into the dark a little bit further.
What do you think would need to be done to fix that or change that stigma? Or is it just because it's such a it makes the person look so bad potentially that there's just such a fear around the label of what this person might have to be up against that we just there's no hope of getting over that?
We've seen results in certain communities where the stigma has reduced when it comes to some of those higher risk things, and I think it's in the space of prevention. That the moment that we do a lot more work in helping support prevention education, so, like, let's take like why not? It's only, like, 10 minutes in, so let's talk about suicide. Like, that seems like it's my life these days.
Is that a main?
It's one of my areas of focus. Yeah. So
can you tell us other areas you work on before we talk about this?
Yeah. So currently, for the last almost 12 years, I work with an organization in Los Angeles County. It's called D.D. Hirsch. We operate the suicide hotline for the state of California. So anywhere in the continuous United States, if you dial the numbers 988, that is the suicide hotline. So instead of calling 911 for a police or medical emergency, you call 988 for a mental health emergency. There used to be a long number. It was like an 800 number and a string.
That takes too long.
It takes too long for people to remember. It's now 988. And wherever you are in the United States, based off of your zip code and where you're located, it geotags you to a suicide hotline. in LA County.
And there's a trained professional on the other line who's going to be able to talk to you.
Trained professional. Sometimes it's a volunteer who's been trained. Sometimes it's a person who is, working there and trained, who will stay on the phone with you and talk you through whatever is going on. But it's also a resource line. So people can call who are not actively in crisis, looking for resources, looking for help, looking to know where to go. It also gets used as a disaster line. So when we had the fires in the Palisades fires, people were calling to know when's the local shelter, where can I get food, where can I get supplies. All of that exists as well. So we operate that. That's part of what we do for LA County. But like my own personal area that I have specialized in direct clinical care is high-risk clinical cases. So that is defined as people who have pervasive and excessive high-risk traumas, people who are on the throes of danger to themselves, like people who actively cut, people who are suicidal, and people who fall into what is called personality disorders, which is longer, more chronic, pervasive mental health concerns and issues.
Such as schizophrenia,
borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, people with a history of violence and crime. Sometimes people with psychotic disorders. However, most of the time when people have like schizophrenia or something along those lines, psychiatry is their first primary defense mechanism. But like anything that you would define as a crisis or challenging or difficult in the field of mental health, like that's my vibe. That's like
you thrive off of that. That's when you come alive.
Yeah, like
put you in the triage trauma situation,
yeah,
quote unquote, literally or figuratively, taking them from getting, here's the ledge, and you're talking them off the ledge.
Literally and figuratively. So when I started out in this area of work and space, I would do a lot more direct care. Now I do a lot more macro work.
Direct care would mean
seeing people myself, seeing clients myself. And one of the things I used to do is I was part of a task force where we'd go out on calls in the middle of the night or in evenings when there was a crisis that was going on. So
someone who would call 988.
Someone pre-988, but someone called 911. 911 would call a mental health team and say, hi, we have somebody who's sitting on a bridge or a rooftop. Somebody able to come out and talk to them. And I would go out
to a bridge,
to a rooftop, climb up a billboard and sit with somebody and talk to them. And just like take the stairs on take the little ladder that's on a billboard or whatever it is and go sit next to somebody and talk to them while they're actively, considering ending their life.
And you have gotten these people to step off that ledge.
I've had both.
I just thought of a Third Eye Blind song. I'm sorry.
I know that song. I love that song. I've had both scenarios. I've had scenarios in which on the way to the call, the police were like, we don't need you anymore, and you don't ask questions. I've had scenarios in which I was there, had a conversation with the person, and they didn't make it. And I've had scenarios in which, more scenarios than not, where we were able to, get that person to step off that ledge. And that space of mental health, like that area, is very scary for a lot of people. A lot of people who are even in the field of mental health are not interested in working with that population. They feel like, the person's life is in their hands. They're responsible for them. But that is the area that I have found to be most efficient in my work, most impactful, and also I find it to be really meaningful because it's not for everyone. And someone should do it, and someone who is able to do it and not have it impact them personally as much is really the right person to be in those spaces.
I'm going to ask you a spiritual question. Do you feel that some people can wake up and say, "Okay, I'm a rabbi. I'm bringing joy to people. I'm connecting dots for certain people. I'm getting people closer to meaning and purpose and hopefully a future." And sometimes people are also accountants, and it's a little bit harder for them to find the meaning or the purpose in life. In your scenario, do you think about these kinds of more bigger spiritual questions and say, you know what, God, thank you for giving me this gift. Thank you for giving me this talent. Did I have to develop it? You know, is this your purpose in life? Do you ask those kinds of questions sometimes?
Yes, and yes. And to elaborate on that, I personally don't think there's anything in the field of mental health that can't already be found through the spirituality of Judaism. I think all of that is already there. There are wonderful, Jewish texts and books that have been written years and years and years ago that are better than any of the self-help guides you can find today for people who are like moderate to low risk in terms of their mental health needs. And I think you're familiar with this, but the audience may not. Is not that for the last 2 years almost on a weekly basis, I have been writing an article in a blog for a local Jewish magazine on the intersection of the weekly Torah portion and the field of mental health. So I'll pick a topic and relate it back to the field of mental health. It's Friday today, Shabbat coming up tonight, and we have like this week's Torah portion, which is Lech Lecha. God told Abraham, leave your home, leave this place you've established, leave all these things that you've created for yourself, and go somewhere else. And it was a test. The moment he passed that test, he right away got to the new location. He created an altar and he made some sacrifices to God as a form of showing thanks. And like all of the commentaries there talk about the value of giving thanks and the praise of thanks. So I did a little bit of a dive into the attitude of gratitude, how an individual who is more grateful in life feels less distress in their life, and went down the road of like one of the clinical ways in therapy to counteract jealousy is to actually start giving to that person. So if you're jealous of a person, then one of the ways, which is in the field of mental health, we call it opposite emotion response, do the opposite of what you feel. You give, and
you'll start liking them more.
You start liking them more because you're giving to them constantly. And there are specific lessons we learn from Abraham. We learn these lessons of the moment you pass a test, the moment you go through something difficult in your life, instead of saying like, why did I go through that? Why was I put through that? Show gratitude for making it to the other end. So I think there's nothing in the field that isn't directly spiritual in some ways. And to something you said about purpose, I've always felt, not always, in the last 10 years now, I would say, in the beginning of my career, there was a lot of, should I still do this? I don't know if I'm right for this. A lot of imposter syndrome that was being felt. But over time, I kind of settled in and realized that like, this is my purpose. This is what I'm good at. It's what brings me joy. It also helps me help other people. And a while ago, I've been traveling since the war and the situation in Israel, back and forth for a while to do some work and some consultation and treatment in Israel. And I had the opportunity a few years back to meet with Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, who is the chief Sephardi rabbi of Israel.
The son of Rabbi
Ovadia Yosef. So he's the chief Sephardi rabbi of Israel. He's like the biggest deal you can find in the Sephardi community, and he's very well known and well established in Israel as well. I had the opportunity to meet with him, and I asked him, I said to him, do you have any advice for people who are suicidal? Because of the space that I've been doing a lot of my work in at the time, and a lot of the rise in suicide, which we can talk about as well in the Jewish community. And his response right away was, I'm not a counselor, talk to a counselor. I said, I'm a counselor. I'm asking if you have any advice for me working with people who are doing that.
I'm talking to you as a spiritual
like
body.
Person to person, like professional to professional, if I could even put us on that, not on the same level, but what is your advice? And he pointed me and said, go look at this certain Torah portion, this certain parsha, and he said that there's this passage, this text that says, constantly be walking with God, always be walking with God. It's a pasuk in Parsha Shoftim. And he said to me, are you familiar with this? And I said to him, it's interesting that you're pointing that out. He was smiling. He said, Makir, are you familiar with this? I said, yes. He said, it's my bar mitzvah parsha. It's the portion that like I learned and had to learn for like becoming bar mitzvah. And he said to me, go look at the, commentary on there. And the commentary says that a person who wants to constantly be walking with God needs to be careful to not look constantly into the future. If you're constantly trying to see what the future will look like, that will make your present difficult. And what I was understanding him saying was that people who are suicidal, people who are struggling, are constantly living in either the past or the future, and they're not living in the present. And if you can help them see the present as a place that they want to live, then they don't have to be in the future. And I thought that was really, really powerful. And I said to him, like, I recognize this. I know this pasuk. I know this passage. And then he said to me, so azza tafkid shelcha. So now this is your purpose. So which was something that I probably already knew, but crystallized for me in his words, that like, if this was your bar mitzvah portion, if this is the area you focus in, and this is the passage I'm telling you is the best, clinical piece of information, this is your purpose in life. You have defined. So like, I think a lot of people struggle with like, what's your purpose? What are you striving for? Like I kind of got the biggest Jewish Sephardi leader in the world to tell me, you're right, this is your purpose. Keep doing it. And
if you can't get any more validation.
Yeah, like you don't like, it can't get any more validation than that. Like that was like the stamp of like of approval. And what he said is really what the research shows. So like when I've sat when people have asked me like, what do you tell somebody who's suicidal? What do you tell somebody when you're on a bridge with them? What do you tell somebody when they're on a rooftop with them? Like, how do you fix their life? And what's interesting is that like, that's not my job. My goal is not to make their life better. My goal is to ask them a very simple question. Why now? Why today? I'm not trying to make them not ever think about this again. I'm making them come off the ledge today and live for tomorrow. Like, it's 2 a.m. Have you eaten? You may be tired. You might not be sober. Like, make this decision at 1 o'clock in the afternoon after a full day's rest and a full meal rather than
You're trying to get them to that place.
You just get them to the next day. You get them to be in the present. You get them to live in the today and not think about how everything tomorrow will be terrible because everything in the past has been terrible. And you delay and delay until you have more time to actually do the work and the treatment. So in that way, like all my job is to make them see the sunrise. And that is a lot easier than trying to solve all of the issues. Like the therapist who has to work with them, that I think is harder work than the person who's sitting there just saying like, it's 2 a.m., why today? Why not tomorrow? What is something that you might want to just wait to see tomorrow instead?
So have you also done that kind of therapy with clients as well?
Yeah. I had a situation where I was called out to, I can't remember where, but it was some bridge or some freeway overpass. And there was like a 16-year-old girl who was there. She's sitting there with her backpack. And I went over and and usually what we do is you try to build rapport. You try to find a way to connect with the person. So I was told by the EMS and the emergency services that were there on the scene that like, no one has gotten her to talk about anything yet. Like we don't know her name. We don't know any information about her really. So I came over and I sat there and I just scanned her and what was going on. I looked at her backpack and I realized that she had Marvel and DC stickers, patches on her backpack. So like right away I sat down and I said to her, Marvel or DC? And she like looked over to me.
Spider-Man or?
She looked over to me and she like looked me up and down and she was like, Marvel. And I was like, and then and then right away I was like, okay, so we got a response. So I was like, are you more of a Cap or Iron Man? This was, I think, a little while back when like that was the big part of the Marvel.
You have to know your stuff.
Yeah, you gotta be a little bit of a comic book nerd, which is I definitely am. And I was like, Marvel. I asked her like, where we at? Who's your person? And in like prototypical fashion of somebody who's actively in a dark place, she looked at me and she was like, neither. And I was like, oh, okay, well, like that might have ended the conversation. And a few seconds later, she was like, my favorite person is the Daredevil. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, and I started and I said, so I assume you're familiar with the Daredevil show on Netflix when it was, before Disney and everything that's been going on? She's like, yeah, I'm a fan of the show. So I took my shot right there and I said, the season's not over yet. Have you seen every episode? She said, no, I haven't seen every episode yet. And I said,
you should.
Aren't you curious what's going to happen at the end of the season? And I got a little bit of like a chuckle, and I was like, well, like, you have your phone on you? You have Netflix with you right now? No, I don't. Well, how are you going to know what happened to your favorite character where we're sitting right now? And we started to have a conversation about the only thing that this person in that moment believed was worth living for was to see the end of a TV show and to see how it would go. It turns out that like she was there because her stepdad was sexually abusing her in the house, and she really didn't want to be in that house, and she didn't know how to tell her mom because this person was taking care of mom. It was the first person who was taking care of mom, but like she didn't know if she had to take it or live there. So I asked, like, after you're going to go to the hospital because you're going to get some help right now, but would you be willing to see me and work with you? And she said yes, up until the show ends. And so we made a deal, which was instead of binging, she had to watch the last 4 episodes 1 week after another. So like, you come to therapy, you walk in an episode, you come to therapy, you watch an episode, give me 4 sessions. So thankfully, I watched ahead. I knew the show. I knew what was going on. I knew how it ended. And we worked through, let's find you another place to live. Let's help you with some of the trauma. Let's actually go get you medical care to see if like you're okay, if you need anything. So we got to that 4th session, and I said, so like, what are your thoughts now that the show is over? And the funniest response I got was, you saw it. You know it ended on a cliffhanger. You know they're going to do a season 2. And I was like, well, yeah, yes. I did. There is a season 2. I looked online. They're apparently already in the works for Netflix. And that just meant, okay, well, I'll continue to work with you. And we ended up working together for about 16, 17 sessions or so until I got transferred to somebody else to do a little bit more of the long-term work. But it was Marvel and a TV show and a comic book. That was the only thing that was the in to get them to start wanting care. And then eventually the work needed to be done, and it was successful. Like, from last I recall, several years now. It's been several years now. This person she went off to college. She finished her undergrad degree, and is living a life worth living now. All because like she had her backpack that had DC and Marvel logos on it.
And thank God you were attuned enough to be. God gave you the right words to say at the right time, and
yeah, I know. I think again, like we pray every single day, 3 times a day in Judaism. And there's certain like phrasings and certain words that like very much resonate with me as somebody who's in the field of mental health. Like at the beginning of our like prayer, one of our seminal prayers every day, the Amida, the Shemona Esrei, like we start by saying, God, open my mouth so I can give you the praise. And I always think to myself, like, at the beginning of each workday, like open my mouth and make sure the right words come out, because each word has meaning. And sometimes you only get 1 or 2 sentences with the person before they make their choice. And it's actually in a lot of the work that I've been doing, I do a lot more macro work now, where I'm doing advocacy work. Or
that was going to be my next question.
Speaking engagements and lecturing. That's a lot of what I talk about, like word choice and how it matters, so that people like know how to do that kind of crisis work.
So you're still working for D.D. Hirsch, or are you still doing this kind of more of the macro stuff with D.D. Hirsch, or did you start your own company, or have you done?
So no pun intended. I wear a lot of hats. I'm working with D.D. Hirsch, but thankfully they've given me a lot of flexibility in my work schedule. So there are a few other things I do. I have been for around 7 years now teaching at Pepperdine University in their graduate school of psychology. So I'm a professor in their program there.
Teaching what classes?
I generally teach the class while students are working directly to get their clinical experience. It's called practicum. It's like their rotation class. I used to teach group counseling, which was a lot of fun. And then once I transitioned to teaching virtually, because the graduate school is now a national program, didn't feel as fun to teach group when everyone was just on a Zoom screen rather than in person. So this rotation class is really great because it's a lot of, coaching and education of therapists who are trying to grow in their space. I do a little bit of direct care still because it's I always want to stay directly tied to it. But my direct care has shifted primarily to only the Jewish community. There's been a great need of mental health services in the Jewish community, and it's not really been available or existed at a high level. The vast majority of people who work in the field of mental health are women, and even more so in the Jewish community. So to find a man who can work with an at-risk young boy or a high school student boy is not that common. So occasionally I will have the local high schools contact me when they have a boy that they would consider to be at risk. And I take that case on and I work with them privately, and do this similar kind of therapy. But to what you mentioned, it's been about several months now that I have worked with a partner of mine, and we've co-founded a mental health organization. It's a nonprofit that is called NOSE LA. It's based off of the idea in Judaism of Nose Bolim Chavero, like carrying your burden of your friend. It's a culturally sensitive, affordable mental health service for Jewish people. Therapy is really expensive in general for many, many justifiable reasons. But for people who can't afford it, they oftentimes can't find people who are culturally sensitive. So this model, people are paying anywhere between, on the high end, $100 a session, on the low end, $50 for therapy. And they're working with good, competent therapists who are receiving supervision under myself and my colleague.
So these are people who are trying to get their hours?
Yeah, people who are trying to get their hours, people who are growing in their training, some who are licensed.
So it's a win-win.
Some who are unlicensed. They need the experience, they need the training.
And these people need the therapy.
And these people need therapy at an affordable price or affordable cost. And we're filling that need for them. So for people who need a very high level of therapy or specialization, they're continuing to go where they need to go. But this model is for more of the common person who has need but can't afford that need, and it's beginning to show a lot of promise. We have, as of this week now, 4 therapists who are doing work. We've gotten an abundance of people calling for cases and for treatment, and it's growing, and we're only going to scale based off of the needs of the community as well. But it's like you said, it's a win-win for the community because it gives an affordable option for those who can't afford it. It gives a option for good clinical training for those people who are wanting to grow as therapists. And it allows me to be very tied to the Jewish community and give back, taking a lot of the nonprofit experience I've gotten in my full-time job and kind of play that into our community as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You had said something on the Jewish side of it, and going back to man's search for meaning, and then there's also this teaching called Ethics of the Fathers, and you might be familiar with this teaching. It's in chapter 4, Mishnah number 1, and it says, who is the rich person? The rich person is the person who is happy with their portion or happy with their lot. So I'm curious, because you said something about living in the present, and I'm curious that if people were to live more in the present, or to be here, in the here, right now, not necessarily in the past, not necessarily in the future, they would be more happy with their portion. They'd be more happy with their lot. They would be, I'm content with what it is that God has given me. And I'm just curious, I don't know if you can just make a blanket statement of what I'm saying, but I'm just curious if that blanket statement would have any weight to how people live their lives.
Yes, I think you can make a blanket statement like that. Interestingly enough, the area of my own direct personal research has been in the area of being present focused. Time permitting, I'll ask you a clinical question. Okay. Why not? I'll teach your audience a little bit about you as well. But what we ask people to do is we ask them to envision time as 3 points on a triangle. So 3 points on a triangle: past, present, and future. And we ask people in clinical care, we ask just general lay people as well, what percent of your time do you as an individual spend thinking about or focused on the past? What percent of your time do you spend focused on the present? And what percent of your time do you spend focused on the future? And if you can, and if you're comfortable enough sharing with your audience, break that down by 100%. What percent is past? What percent is present? And what percent is future? And let's see what those numbers look like. I'm not going to label or diagnose
No,
it.
it's fine. I mean, I don't dwell on the past. So my past it shaped me for who I've become today. And I would say my past doesn't play a huge role in my, it doesn't take up much real estate in my time. It is what it is. I would say that I've tried to do a lot of work to stay in the present, but I will say that I'm an excited guy who likes to think about future projects and how can I help implement more actualized or bigger things for my community. So right now I'm currently thinking about the next project for J-Hub, or the next project to help bring in more Jewish people into the community. So if you'd asked me this maybe a month ago, I wouldn't have been so focused on the future. I would be just more in the present. So I would say arbitrary number. I would say 10% past, 60% present, 30% future.
10, 60, 30. Wonderful.
That was just off the cuff.
It's a good answer. What the research that I've been working on shows, and we did I was scheduled to do a TED Talk on this exact research, but the date of the TED Talk coincided with Yom Kippur, so I pulled a Sandy Koufax and I didn't go to my TED Talk. So the research that we've been working on shows that the highest level of balance is 15% in the past, 15% in the future, and 70% in the present.
Okay. For not knowing the numbers, I was...
Very, very good. What we found is that what is considered to be a good, healthy response, as well, is 25% in the past, 25% in the future, and 50% in the present. The idea being that your present should be equal to or exceed the other 2/10 of time. People who are younger tend to lean a little bit more towards the future. People who are parents or people who are big thinkers lean a little bit more towards the future. And people who are older lean a little bit more towards the past. Makes sense. What we tell people once we ask this question to them in therapy is we give them this disclaimer. Individuals who tend to be overly focused on the past are susceptible to anger problems, substance use problems, and depression. We know that from the research. And people who end to be too overly reliant on the future tend to be people who end up becoming more anxious, oftentimes more burnt out, and can lead to purposelessness in their life. And in therapy, what we say to somebody after we ask them that question is, would you be interested in creating a life that's worth living by becoming more present focused? And many of us who can resonate with that, because it's not stigmatizing. It's not, it's not pushing somebody and saying, here's your problem. It's saying, like, you may have a predisposition towards being a little anxious. You may have a predisposition to being a little bit more depressed. I think it's 1 in 5 people experiences depression at some point in time in their lives. 1 in 4 people experiences anxiety. The Jewish numbers are higher than that. So we
Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David, Woody Allen.
Yeah, but like
nothing against them at all.
But to exactly what you said, and I think like it's a maybe a lasting quote for people who might be listening, and it speaks to what you said. The past should be a place of reference, not a place of residence. So you don't want to live in the past; you want to refer to the past. And the future is a useful place to live, but a person who has strong motivation in life and does not tie that to action equals anxiety. So if you're motivated in many ways but don't do anything about that, that is anxiety.
Yeah.
And those two kinds of juxtapositions of both of those things are a reminder that for many of us, today is a great day. Every day is a great day. When you think of it in its own right as its own single event and day. And even if it isn't, the next day you have available to you, and it might be better. There was a commencement speech given at the Marine Corps a little while ago where the chief spoke about, he said that everything I've learned about being a good soldier, I've learned from making my bed every day. And he said that every day you get out of bed, I start by making my day. And and that's one achievement. I start by achieving something and creating something and finishing something that day and being present in a task. And all these things can go wrong throughout the day. But in the end of the day, even if I had a terrible day and nothing worked out for me, I come home to a bed that's made and I get into my made bed. So he was present to begin with the day, and it helps him and shapes that each day is another opportunity, another experience where he can be present focused. I think that's what resonates with me, and that's what gives me a lot of strength daily, even if things are difficult. You have tomorrow, you have the next day. Each day is another opportunity to live a life that's worth living.
Normally I would say give closing remarks, but I just feel like this entire talk has just been just one big closing remark, because everything that you have said has just been so practical and so meaningful and so relevant. And I think there's a lot of gems that that one can glean who's watching this episode, that one can take from this. So I feel like you've said a lot, Elan, and I've learned a tremendous amount from this sitting here with you, and it's profound that I can call you my friend, and happens to be that Elan and I were in a same Torah class that we learn Torah every day, and
we're also part of a group chat.
We're part of a Cool Dads group chat.
Shout out to the Cool Dads.
Shout out to the Cool Dads. You know who you are, and I just want to say thank you for being a cool dad, being a cool leader, and somebody who we could all learn from. And God willing, we should go from strength to strength and continue to make a difference in our community.
Amen. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.